So welcome. This is our City Council Position 3 endorsement interview. We're going to go ahead and get started. Joe's, I think, is joining us in a few minutes, so we'll start with the commissioner. But first, we're going to have each of you tell us why you're running for this position and why you think you'd be the best person to do the job. If you could keep it to a minute or under, that would be great. We'll start with you, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the invitation. I am running for re-election because I have started to change systems that have been unchangeable forever, including our first responder system with Portland Street Response, including the first of its kind national, truly independent police oversight board. We're in the process of hiring a civilian training dean, starting a summer works program that will bring 20 to 30 young people in to rotate through our first responder bureaus. If you look at what I said I would do in 2018 and what I've done in my 3 years and 3 months in office, you will see that I kept my promises and I'm continuing to move work forward that actually addresses systemic issues of working people and low-income people and people of color in the city of Portland that have been neglected for decades.
Thank you. Renee?
Thank you so much for having me. Renee Gonzalez, small business owner, raising 3 children on the east side, 5th generation Portlander. I have had a number of leadership roles in the nonprofit and for-profit world over my career, including at the largest privately owned company in the city of Portland, as a legal manager, as a leader in strategy, Knowledge Universe KinderCare. Knowledge Universe and KinderCare.
You were running KinderCare?
No, I was head of corporate strategy and then the head of the transaction legal practice
During a
there.
period of time when KKR owned?
Post KKR. And it, in addition, have led a number of nonprofits, including the largest youth soccer club in the city of Portland, built that through mergers and acquisitions and some joint ventures. Also led the successful reopening efforts for schools statewide. That was a 40,000 member bipartisan effort across the state. Rural Republicans, blue Democrats, all working together to get kids back in school safely in sports. I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, have you run for office before?
Nope, first time.
And why are you running?
Deeply concerned about livability in the city, and particularly our out of control crime and homeless and our inability to confront those 2 issues.
Okay.
Vadim?
Vadim Mazursky, thank you for having me here. Good to meet some new people and see some people I've met before. I'm running for office because, like many immigrants, my family moved around a lot, and I came here and I decided I was going to settle down and be part of Portland life. I've been involved in several organizations here, the Disability Commission, a couple of police oversight committees. I've been involved in the Charter Commission now, and in my private life in the Public Safety Action Coalition, as well as board member of organizations such as IRCO. And I kept seeing how difficult it was to get common sense solutions done. Talking to people that are trying to live well, improve their life here in Portland, and work together to actually improve the conditions. We found it very difficult to get those voices heard at City Hall, and that's why I'm running, because I have the policy knowledge. I've worked in these fields. What we're seeing is a pendulum swing from, say, defunding the police to now refunding the police. We have different policies between this for homelessness between the city, county, metro, and the Here Together, the homeless coalition policies. And I've worked on these things. I've talked to these individuals. A lot of them are endorsers now because we can make those policies work together. And I have the experience. I've been working with people in City Hall, with the community, neighborhood associations, businesses, people in East Portland, West Portland, and bringing people together. And I think that's very important right now.
Great. Thanks. Joe, you want to go ahead?
Sure. What's the question?
Give us a 1-minute rundown of who you are and why you are running for this position.
Thank you. I am Joseph Whitcomb, born and raised in Portland, lived here all my life. The reason why I'm running is that I'm not satisfied with our city government. You look at the streets, it's not what I grew up with. I used to be able to go any place in Portland without having to worry about it, no matter what my age was. Now, I can't go anywhere. So I'm stepping up to run for city council because I want to see these things change. I believe that through funding the police department, we will see crime decrease. We will also, by doing that, we can see some people getting off the streets. So I'd like to work on these things. Also working with our natural resources, like City Team Ministries or Portland Rescue Mission, people who are working with the homeless and helping them out, I think we should put our funding towards people like that to move towards getting our streets cleaned up.
And what's your professional background?
I work in the materials department audit group. I've also worked in some management positions a few years back. I've run for a write-in candidate for mayor back in 2020.
What percentage of the vote did you get?
I'm sorry?
What percentage of the vote did you get?
The write-in during that time got approximately 14% of the vote, which equates to around 46 to 47,000. I believe that my campaign pulled in around 36, 37,000 votes, giving up some votes to Mickey Mouse and Friends, and giving up some votes to Teresa Raper,
Okay.
who also turned in.
Got it, thanks.
Joseph, what company do you work for?
Daimler Trucks, North America.
Oh yeah, I've heard of them.
Okay, so we're gonna do some rapid fire questions real quick. Some of these questions might seem a little strange to ask, but sort of just big picture. So yes or no questions. We'll start with you, Commissioner. And I'll just say a question and then go down the line. Do you believe abortion should be legal?
Yes.
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 Joe?
No.
Okay. Do you believe climate change is real?
Yes.
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 No.
Okay. Do you support gay marriage?
Yes.
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 Sure.
Okay.
And then a little more narrow, do you think the mask mandate in Oregon was necessary?
Yes.
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 No.
Okay.
Do you think I-5 should be widened?
I think it should be improved. I can't, widen would mean a multimodal, fast-moving, lots of people vehicle. And so I can't, for me, it's not a yes or no, because I'm actually in the details of it right now. I think we should have a people-moving vehicle on I-5, and I don't think we should add more lanes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes with tolling and also public transportation.
Yes.
Okay. And last one, are police treated fairly in this city?
Yes?
No.
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 Okay. Do you want to move into the?
Yeah, we'll start with homelessness. I first want to ask about the People for Portland proposed ballot initiative. Do you support it, Commissioner?
No.
Okay, do you?
Is it a short answer? Or?
No, you can expand on this one if you want.
I mean, directionally, I'm supportive. I think we've underinvested in shelter. I think the housing first approach does a serious disservice to a lot of our unsheltered, pits off getting them access to stable housing of some sort or stable shelter. So directionally, I think it's the right direction. Having said that, when we look at the underlying causes of being unsheltered, addiction and mental illness, we can't ever oversimplify the issue. We've got to confront those underlying issues.
Would you vote for it if it were on the ballot tomorrow?
Yes, I think I would vote for that tomorrow. And partially it's a belief that so much of our government at all levels has bet whole hog on housing first, and I think that's a mistake. And we've got to get folks sheltered as soon as possible.
So I'd like to weigh in a little bit more, because I didn't know that wasn't a yes or no
Yeah,
question.
no, you can expand on it.
All right, we need a continuum of housing options, because we don't have a one-size-fits-all houseless community. We have people who lost everything in March of 2020. They lost their 1 and 2 $15 an hour jobs, their kids' education, security, and they have not started the road to recovery. In a city where the median family income is $96,900, nobody cleaning hotels or working in restaurants or music venues or sports venues are making enough money to live in the city of Portland. So we have 3 groups of houseless folks. We have people who are working but just can't afford first, last security deposit, pet deposit, and pet rent. We have people who have been displaced because of COVID and what's happened since then. We have some people who are suffering severe mental health issues, and we have nowhere to take them. And we have some people who have alcohol and drug issues, and we have nowhere to take them, right? And so what that means is we need a continuum. Just like when Mighty Dream 2 was in Old Town was safest when Mighty Dream 2 was there.
Do you think we have a continuum currently? I mean,
Not yet,
that was
no.
Dan Ryan's whole project, right?
Yeah, that's but we're still not talking about self-managed villages. We're not talking about tiny home villages. We're not talking about using land we have and actually setting it up so that people can safely camp. What we're talking about is either concentration camps or waiting for housing to be built that people can afford to live in.
Would you offer up PBOT land for
I would offer up
self-managed
PBOT
villages?
land. I would offer up golf courses. I would offer up the any publicly owned land. And I think the city should be a leader in asking Metro, what are you going to get? What's the school district going to get? What's the county going to get? Right? This is an all hands on deck moment, and we can't just do what we've always done and somehow expect different outcomes. And I've been working very closely with Commissioner Ryan on this issue. But again, these villages will serve at a max 300 people. We got 4,000 people houseless that we know of.
Vadim?
I lost what the question was. Can you repeat it?
The metro, the
People for Portland.
homeless.
Whether I support it or not?
Yes.
I support parts of it. We need to have the short-term shelter space. There's no question, as Commissioner Hardesty said, that we have a very complex situation. We have people living on the streets with drug addiction, mental health crises, some people that have lost their jobs, and we're doing a good job with the vouchers, getting people back on their feet, and we're not doing a good job of providing services. And
Would you vote for the ballot if it weren't?
not as it currently is, but I think we need to examine how much of the money needs to be spent on short-term shelters versus the long-term shelters.
Is
And-
there, so currently it's at 75%, is there a percentage you would feel more comfortable with to a point where you would vote for it?
Well, that's the thing. We need to have a discussion with the Here Together people to understand exactly what the best practice is. I don't think it's good to have just business people saying this is the right number, or Here Together saying
Yeah.
that's the right number. We need to get together
Yeah.
at the median point.
So, I mean, we've obviously talked over the past week, and last time I talked to you about this, which I think was Monday, you said that you were agnostic about this ballot measure, and whatever the voters wanted, you would support. What's changed since Monday?
Well, you're asking me whether I would vote for it. So right now,
So on the bigger scale, though, if it weren't a personal decision,
yeah.
I mean,
Oh.
would you be agnostic about it on the larger scale?
If most of the voters in Portland vote for 75% being allocated to short-term shelter space, I would go for that. That's what the voters want.
Even if you don't feel that personally that's the right thing to do?
Well, the question is what the number is for me personally. But at the same time, you have to be responsive to the voters' needs. I mean, we're here as elected officials not to tell the voters what they want. We're here to listen to what the voters need. And so, I might differ on what 75%, 80%, 60%, 50% of voters want, but I can see that those are the voters. Those are the people that elect me. Those are the people that determine what the direction Portland is going for. Now, I can talk about it to them. I could try to understand, lead coalitions to hear about what the proper answers could be and then disseminate that information. But if the voters vote on it, that's that.
Okay. What is the first proposal you would bring to City Council regarding homelessness if you were elected? We'll start with you, Vadim.
So the first proposal is to work not only within the city, PBOT, and all these other organizations that apparently have land but they're not being used, but also with the developers, with people that are in Portland that might have the ability to find places for short-term housing. And so my proposal will be built on say Keith Wilson's plan where Built for Zero, where we're trying to find places for people to stay, whether that be pop-up shelters, whether that be camping areas, designated places to link in with services, because that's what we're missing here in Portland right now.
So what exactly, that sounds like that's a very large, can you be more specific about what actionable item you would be bringing to council?
Well, the actionable item is how do we fund the fact that we can, once we find these lands, first of all, we need to bring people to the table and
create a
whatever.
coalition, pretty much.
Well, yeah, but where are these properties? Because we hear that there's properties out there, but for some reason we can't even find 6 properties for.
Do you mean land, buildings?
Yeah, land, buildings. I've heard that there's parking structures available where we can have temporary shelter spaces available. I've heard from one developer that they have a place in East Portland available, but the county's not working with them. So there's these impediments to finding these locations. And then the funding stream. How do we actually set up places for people to go, get the services over there, provide the transportation from these properties to the service providers and vice versa, and make sure that drug addiction services, Measure 110 money, all that is going to the right individuals so that those services are available. And that is what's missing, that connection between the money, the services, and people living in our cities.
So I'm sure you've heard of this, but the 3,000 challenge that a bunch of housing advocates have been talking about finding empty units, that seems like it's parallel to that. Is that something you would support and engage with those providers? Because it seems like they haven't gotten a whole lot of traction.
Right. And what's the incentive there? So, for instance, right now, an individual I work with is on the board for Home Share, which is kind of doing the same thing. If you have an extra room, the city, the county, the state, wherever the funding sources might be, would pay for you to have a homeless person live with you, and then you can, prevent eviction or things like that. So there's all these things. It's going to take a village. So part of that is, if people have rooms and they're willing to afford an opportunity for people to live in that, that's part of it. But we also have to acknowledge that we have people with very serious mental health problems, very serious drug addiction problems that are not amenable to directly being linked to some of these locations and living with people.
So how do we approach those folks?
Well, we approach those folks as we do right now. We go out to them. We say we have a place for you to go. We have a place for you where you can get counseling.
But where? I mean, do you would that look like an emergency shelter, or where would you put the people who are kind of struggling from the double whammy of drug addiction and mental health crisis?
Mm-hmm. It's a triage. So, for instance, San Antonio, they have a model where there's a large shelter space available, and then there's camping areas outside, and people, based on their level of comfort, can camp, and then once they're ready to move into the shelter, they can move into the shelter. That's a model. I think Homer Williams proposed that a while back here in Portland, and that was taken up. But there's various models that are working around the United States that are effective, and so we have to make sure that those models are available, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Some people can directly go in and live with other individuals, and they'll be fine. Other individuals need to build up that ability to live in a structured environment and so forth.
Renee, what's one proposal?
We actually abandoned houseless people on the street in March of 2020. The C3PO camps were the very first camps that anybody created for people who were houseless. So investors, they poured $4 billion since COVID started into downtown Portland and central east side. Professionals, we get all our needs met at home, right? By Amazon and Home Depot. Houseless people were left to fend for themselves on the street. I had to force the mayor's office to work to get the C3PO camps insured, because private insurance would not fund nonprofits to put up camps at the height of COVID. So I think there's a difference between now that we're slowly opening up and people are seeing the devastation on our street. There's this assumption that somehow nothing has happened in the last 2 years, when the reality was we abandoned people. And now that you get to see them when you walk out your door, we want to disappear them. The reality is that COVID pointed out the systems failures that were already in place. It just exacerbated it with COVID. And now that people are coming out, rather than spending $700,000 to actually house, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people for a year, people want to spend $700,000 to influence the outcome of this election. If people really wanted people housed, they would support the city using our power of eminent domain and start foreclosing on all these overpriced apartments that Portlanders cannot afford to live in. People are not talking about wanting people to have housing they can afford to live in. They're talking about, let's disappear them so that rich people can come and play.
So I'm sorry, you're proposing that apartments get foreclosed on?
I'm saying if we have empty buildings that the people who live here today can't afford, the city only has only one power, right? On how do we actually use that for the public benefit. But I'm saying that people who want to invest, the realtors who want to invest $700,000 to take me out, if they invested that $700,000 in actually buying apartment spaces, we could house 1,000 people.
But I'm focused on your desire to use eminent domain to foreclose.
I'm saying we should use every tool we have in our toolbox.
But,
why would we not?
Okay, so how does that work? You use eminent domain and you foreclose on private property.
Yes.
that is,
All over town.
right,
That's
private
empty.
apartment buildings
Yeah,
that are empty.
that are totally empty.
There are empty
Or,
apartment buildings?
or night, oh yeah, or at least, we have a lot of, the last count we had was 14,000 vacant apartments, and that was before the $4 billion was poured into downtown Portland.
And I'm sorry, these are vacant because?
Vacant because the people who live here and work here and worship here cannot afford to live in that.
So I mean, so let's say there's, the majority of those open units are in buildings that are not completely vacant. Would you still support the mayor using eminent domain to seize those?
I would support the city using every tool we have, and that's one tool we have. I'm not saying that's the first tool we should use, but the first thing I'm saying is we should assess how many empty apartments are here today. I don't know about you, but I look at the rental every single day, and people are renting out their rooms for $800, $1,000, $1,400, one room.
Where does that stat come from, that there are 14,000 empty apartments?
It actually came from the Business Journal. So if you Google the Business Journal, that was the last time, the figure I got. It was straight out of the Business Journal.
Well, I mean, there is another dimension though, right? You have a landlord strike essentially in the city of Portland, in part created by many of the tenant protections we've adopted in recent years. That leads landlords not to want to rent in scenarios that they would have done prior to instituting those tenant protections. It is so difficult to get rid of difficult tenants in the city of Portland that landlords are simply striking. And you go talk to them about it, they will not take risk on renting right now that they would have 5, 6 years ago.
I gotta tell you, I know landlords that aren't gonna invest in the city of Portland because of the tenant laws. I don't know any landlords that are unwilling to rent a vacant apartment.
Oh, I hear it all the time from small landlords, all the time.
The renter gets no
let me-
income at all from their apartment.
Let me be very
and rent to
specific.
someone.
Yeah, let me be very specific. That they will not take risk on certain tenants that they would have done, the risk they would have taken 6 years ago. So that's not removing it entirely from the marketplace. That's saying if someone has anything in their background that can, they won't take the risk on certain tenants in this environment.
What tenant protections would you repeal if you had the option?
I think we got to take a long look at the tenant relocation. I mean that and
Paying
what,
the relocation
Yeah, I mean that's
fee?
yes, it's brutal for some landlords specifically, and I'd start there. You know, it is.
Which other ones?
I think we got to look at the whole ball of wax and look at what behaviors are resulting from it. So I'd put that one at the top. In terms of the rest of the trades, I don't know, Sophie. I'd have to think about
Behavior?
that.
What do you mean? What kind of behaviors?
Well, the fact that landlords will not rent to tenants that they were willing to rent to before. I mean, you know, when I say it's a landlord strike, again, it's not taking it out of the market. It's saying I'm not going to take a risk on you because there's something in your background that makes me, you know, that it used to be you get out the end of a lease, right? The best solution to getting rid of a difficult tenant, that one that did damage to your property, but you don't have an actionable claim that you actually want to bring in court, was just not to renew. I mean,
Is this saying that landlords won't take the risk on certain tenants? Is this anecdotal? Is this just from your experience of talking to people? Is this
That's from
written
my
somewhere?
experience talking to landlords.
Okay, do you have evidence behind that, or?
Well, I think what Joanne is citing, I mean, there is data out there on the available units right now.
Right, but I'm
that-
asking specifically about what you're saying about tenant or landlords not wanting to rent specifically to people.
A landlord has absolutely told me that.
Well, no, I know, but that's a landlord. Even if it's 10 landlords who have told you that, is there research behind this?
Is there something that causes you on a data level to say, is there a landlord strike? Because that's.
Well, it is, I mean, it's harder to get rid of bad tenants than
No,
it used to
I'm
be.
asking for data that there's a landlord strike.
Well, I mean, I can tell you anecdotally, I talk to landlords all the time. We're much more careful than they used to be about the tenants that they allow in.
But a
because it's hard-
landlord strike, as first described, was not renting apartments.
Right. And
Well-
20% increase in rent doesn't sound like landlords are on strike
Yeah,
if they're making that kind of
I find it hard to
money.
believe that landlords aren't renting apartments. They're just
Yeah.
more careful about who they're renting to.
Right, and I agree with the
So
refinement.
can let's shift this. We did a story last week about the cost of, one of the reasons why the cost of housing is so high in Portland was because the cost of housing is so high. And Michael Anderson wrote a piece in which he said, change rules. Don't require stairwells in 4-story buildings rather than
Don't require a second stairwell on a 4-story.
reduce costs. Tax land not
Sure.
Property.
A land tax rather than what's built upon the land.
Right, and then there was another one that I thought was fairly counterintuitive.
Mark, I can't read your mind. I don't remember which one.
There were 5.
Parking, fewer common areas.
That makes sense.
Fewer common areas.
More apartments, right? Change the zoning.
Oh, change zoning citywide so that there were more 4 floors and corner stores.
Right. So I'm just wondering, A, if you read it, and if you haven't, real problem for you. B, I'm joking, what you think of those suggestions.
I would say from a fire commissioner perspective, not having that second stairwell will cost people their lives. I spent 4th of July this year at a fire where everybody died because it was built before regulations required a second stairwell. And so it's a matter of life and death, and I'd rather the cost save lives and not make it cheaper to build cheaper units that people have no exit.
How about the proposal of changing zoning to allow more, what do you call them here?
4 stores in the corner, 4 floors in the corner store.
That right now it's only limited to a few areas of the city, thus you can't have the kind of density you're looking for.
Well, we are about to change. We're about to do part 2 of the zoning change that we did for inclusion. RIP. Thank you. We're about to do RIP 2, and actually we're supposed to do it, have the public testimony this week, but we pushed it to next week because we are expanding how housing can be built. But I have to tell you, I've actually seen some of the outcomes of RIP so far in neighborhoods. So you can go in the inner Northeast and you can tell people who've lived there 5 years and less and people who've lived there 20 years and more.
And the people who live there 5 years and less.
And the people who lived there 5 years or less paid over $400,000 for their new, skinny, tall, whatever home. And it's just a stark contrast, right? So are we adding more housing units with RIP? Yes. Are we adding them in a way that actually creates opportunity for all income levels? No. So I'm looking forward to the public testimony next week around RIP 2, because there are some areas that should be expanding, but they already have these historic protections that we are really looking at. How do you make sure that every part of the city benefits from growth, and it's not just limited to areas where, like right now, East Portland is the last place left to do something really significant for all income levels, and 82nd Avenue is going to give us that opportunity.
Just a quick question about emergency shelter, and I want each of you guys to answer this, but what's the largest capacity of an emergency shelter that you would feel comfortable with?
The largest number of
beds.
Are you talking about a congregate shelter where we line people up
Yes.
at 6 p.m. and then at 6 a.m. we open the door and push them
Well,
back
so when I
outside?
say emergency shelter, I'm alluding to, plans such as Sam Adams's plan, obviously something like that, or Ted Wheeler's emergency shelter plan.
So I've been on the Board of Human Solutions for 14 years, and I know we know how to do shelters right. And shelters mean that you bring people in and they get to leave their stuff. They live there until they are transitioned out into permanent housing, right? I've also seen how we've done congregate shelters, and it is the most inhumane imaginable thing. No, I don't.
Is it worse than sleeping outside in the rain?
Many people think it is, which is why they do. Because if you have to leave your partner, if you have to leave your worldly possessions, and again, what's maybe garbage to some people is all some people have left in the world. If you have to leave your pet, I mean, it just depends on where you're sending someone, whether they can bring all of themselves with them, right? And so, and I've spent time in these shelters, especially when we do the emergency ones. You would think after doing it under 4 mayors, we'd know how to do these shelters. They were very inhumane. And they don't address anybody's needs other than getting people out of the elements.
So this race to some degree has become a referendum on the incumbent, in part because it's always the issue when there's a incumbent, but I think probably even more so, more acutely so, because of the times we live in. And your concerns and issues with Commissioner Hardesty are fairly well publicized. I'm wondering if you could each take a minute and say one good thing about what she's done. Only if it's genuine and sincere. If you don't have anything, that's fine.
I mean, I do think Portland Street response is a necessary thing. So I obviously take I have some concerns about the timeframes and the money that was spent, but that is something that we need. We have people with mental health crises that unfortunately was being dealt with in a police way. And I think for us to move forward as a city, we need to address it holistically.
And are you satisfied that Portland Street response is actually working?
Not yet, but I mean, it's on the path. I mean, it just rolled out citywide, so it's hard to tell. But I think
your funding
framework is there.
concerns?
Well, we had $5 million for over a year, and we bought one van and employed 3 people. I mean, we could have bought a lot of vans, or to speak for Joe, what Commissioner Hardesty said, I mean, that $5 million could have housed a lot of people if we just spent it directly. There was a lot of money out there that was not well utilized, and that's why City Council, I think, took back that money until it was better used in the future. But now we have the frameworks, it's been studied, and we have people out there helping individuals in mental health crises and drug addiction crises.
Thanks, Renee.
You know, I didn't know Joanne until I ran, but I found when I'm with her a theme, a thread that has carried over in her time on City Council, and that is she is deeply human and approachable, and she speaks sometimes at a level that a lot of other politicians are unable to, at a real base, in a good way, humanitarian way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your turn.
And what's your question?
My question is, offer some self-criticism of your term in office. What have you done wrong?
Well, I certainly haven't been 100%, perfect. What have I done wrong? I've lost my temper once or twice. I said some things that I regretted the moment I said them. That's really it.
Can we talk about your personal financial situation?
Sure, let's talk, yeah.
Can you tell us what it is?
What's the question?
What is your personal financial situation? I mean, I can be more specific if you like, but that's a pretty clear question.
Right now, I have $16,000 in credit card debt for Bank of America. And I acquired that debt when I ran for office the first time, because that year I made $1,800, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I had several credit cards, and I lived on my credit cards, and then I got elected, and then I started paying them off. However, the Bank of America, 30-plus year relationship, they said, no, we want it all now. And I said, good luck with that. So I am in the process of paying them back on an installment.
Do you have any other unpaid debts that you owe?
I have credit cards like most working people.
So there are other unpaid credit card debts?
I have credit cards that are being paid on time,
Okay.
that I had no issues with.
At the time, so you were sent notifications to appear in court, and you didn't get them or didn't see them or ignored them?
I was given a notice that said that I would have to respond to this Bank of America thing within 30 days.
Right.
And then I heard nothing. And then 3 months passed. And then I got a call from a reporter who said, well, where were you? That was the only, I had one letter, but again,
You had one letter from Bank of America saying...
Marcus, we have to move on for time, but.
That's all right.
But again, I had one letter.
So could we get you to turn over to us a statement of your financial situation?
No. Are you asking all them about their financials?
I'm not, but they haven't raised the same concerns.
No. No. What would you like to have?
To try to determine what your financial situation is. I mean, you got a 6-figure salary at the city council.
Okay.
I assume you got a pension from the Navy.
You would assume wrong, because you would assume that I retired from the Navy, which I did not.
So you've got no other pension.
I have my salary from the city of Portland. It's my income.
So again, you've clearly had some financial challenges. You're in public office. Your financial situation does strike me as a matter of public interest.
I think I've answered, do I owe debt? Yes. Am I paying it off? Yes. There should be no other question. Am I doing my job at city council?
No, I made it very clear. I'm talking about your personal finances.
Right.
Are there any other legal actions that have been or are being taken against you for non-payment?
Well, I mean, I've gone through several divorces. I declared bankruptcy way back when. But again, I am a working person. I wasn't born with a trust fund. I wasn't born with wealthy friends. I've always made very low, this is the most money I've ever made in my life, right? Mm-hmm. Having said that, I've been a community organizer for over 30 years. I didn't make a lot of money, but I wasn't in it for the money. So I don't know, again, I've answered your question.
Okay, I'm gonna move on.
And no, I
for
will
the-
not give you any additional financial information.
I'm gonna move on, Mark. I need to move on for the sake of time. We have other questions we need to get to. I want to ask some policing questions. So I will start with you, Renee. What is the ideal number of police officers in Portland? Total sworn officers?
I mean, I'd look at our historic ratio of police officers to population and start there. And there have been some evolutions in policing. I think Joanne did come around on street cameras for traffic, and I think that was a step in a positive direction that lessens the number of sworn police officers we need. But Deem has articulated some good ideas about using non-sworn police officers on our streets. I think those are both commendable steps.
Do you have a number in mind?
Beyond looking at that historic ratio of officers to population, no.
What's the ratio that you would think is ideal?
I mean, I'd look at our average, plot it out, our average. I mean, you guys report on it. I don't have it recited off the top of my head what that number is, but I'd look at that as a starting point.
Do you know how many officers we currently have?
Oh, what are we in 700s, 800s in terms of sworn police officers?
I don't know the answer, but.
Yeah.
Okay. But do you
I mean, it used to be that there were many more police officers than fire, but that was recently inverted. So the number kind of, which is concerning in its own right, but maybe a topic for another day.
Do you have an ideal number of sworn police officers that there should be?
The base number is 800, and I think if we want to be on the same level with a city like Seattle with some of the same issues, it's going to be about 1,100.
Okay. And do you have how much time do you think should pass before we would get from the 800 to the 1,100? Like, would that be like a 3-year hiring
It would be way
plan
more
for
than
you?
3 years. So I'm not saying I would hire 300 additional, or at this point over 400 additional officers to get there, but that's the conversation we need to have. Do we have enough officers to get to 911 on time and have an adequate response? And what we're seeing right now is per capita, we're about 30% less than Seattle, about 70% less than Denver, both cities roughly the same size, give or take, and about half the national average. So if we're talking about national average, it'd be way more than 1,100. I don't think we have the crime to necessitate that level. We're not Chicago or New Orleans where there's much more crime perhaps, but that's the conversations we need to have. And so we need to ramp up to 800 as quickly as possible because we're budgeted for a little bit more than that as I understand it. And to get to there, that needs to be something that we work on quickly, whether it's providing in-house training here instead of having to go to Salem to get the training over there with the other officers, or recruiting officers that have either left or from other jurisdictions. And that will at least help us address the challenges that we currently face. And then looking forward, if those officers bring us into line and bring down the homicide rates, then wonderful. And if it's still not working, if the 911 times are long, then we need to reevaluate whether other jurisdictions, their number per capita is more in line with what Portland needs in the future.
Commissioner, same question to you. Ideal number of sworn officers?
We won't know what the ideal number is until the staffing analysis is done that the DOJ is requiring us to get. I can tell you since 2017, the police bureau had carried 50 vacancies just kind of as a slush fund that they use for overtime and other equipment that wasn't authorized by the city council. So those positions have been cut. And those were the positions that were cut when, the quote unquote, when people say we defunded them. The positions were cut because they've been vacant since 2017. And so the good news though is we're thinking about community safety much broader than just police. So while we're doing that study, we're also hiring a civilian training dean. As far as the PS3s, I want the same kind of evaluation of PS3s because my understanding is they're secretaries and they're not actually out on the street and they're not engaging with the public. They're actually doing work that the police officers, the sworn officers, aren't doing. So I think it's
they're they're on desk duty essentially?
They're on desk duty, yeah.
Oh.
They have hands and...
So again, what I know is that we have not had the evaluation. It's had a pilot project. And when I asked we had 14, and the police bureau made 12 of the 14 supervisors. And I said, well, how do you only have 14 PS3s and make 12 supervisors? The answer was, well, because we need to hire more. That's not a good reason to promote somebody to be a supervisor. And so I have pushed to have the same, just like the council said, well, we can't fully fund Portland street response until we have an evaluation. I want the same kind of independent evaluation of PS3s. Because honestly, if we need secretaries, we should hire secretaries. We should not be hiring people to pretend that we have a different type of police response than we actually do.
The Training Advisory Council has put forth recommendations as to things that the PS3s can do. The training division and Portland Police also realizes that there's more, and they're going to look into other things that they can do. Right now, they are out there. They are taking reports.
They both are represented by PPA, and so regardless of what people say, they're represented by the same union. And the moment that Mayor Hales allowed that to happen, the city council lost control over what the PS3s could do.
Okay. I'm going to start with...
Could you just elaborate on that? Sorry, 1 sec. So is it your belief that PPA just doesn't want the PS3s to do anything?
They don't want, no. I mean, ideally, no, they don't want them because, again, I think the more people realize that an unarmed response is really a preference, then the less people will want an armed response.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's what I was saying. Thank you. Sorry,
no, you're fine. I'm going to start with Vadim on this question. If you could give a letter grade to the mayor for his handling of gun violence in this city, what grade would you give him?
Oh, I give him a D.
D or B?
D,
okay.
As in dog.
Why is that?
Well, there's been some efforts made to address gun violence, including funding community intervention specialists, but there's not been there's not been a crisis response to what is a crisis out there. Everything's been very slow. So, for instance, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars sitting within the Office of Violence Prevention, waiting to go out in the community to make sure that people are in the streets. So I'm working with faith-based leaders, and they're saying, we know who is in our community, we know what the needs are, we know how to address some of these needs, but they're not seeing the funding streams, and that was held up for many months. Likewise, the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force, hopefully the mayor understood that could be fixed rather than eliminated, and I think that was a caving into public pressure rather than improving an organization. So now we have the focused intervention team. In the meantime, 18 months have passed, and who knows how many lives were lost because we didn't have people out there in the community making sure that gun violence did not escalate. And then lastly, I think we need to form partnerships with state police, with the sheriff's office to make sure we get guns off the streets. And we're not doing that right now. There's not that level of partnerships. There's a lot of distrust amongst the various entities out there, and we need to prevent that the guns in felons' hands that are out there right now illegally from actually causing harm, and we're not doing enough about that.
Okay.
I'd probably give it close to an F. The reduction or elimination of gang and gun reduction positions was a horrific mistake. They're experts at preventing retaliatory crime, deeply problematic. There are other pieces that the mayor, I believe, really took a misstep on when you're looking at violence across the board, that are some things that the mayor doesn't actually directly control, but has influence. So we closed public schools in the city of Portland for over a year. We eliminated sports. We eliminated access to the arts. We eliminated access to a whole bunch of cultural activities in the city, I think there's a direct correlation between crime and destruction of some of those, our social fabric, in really fundamental ways. And at times we need a city council and a mayor, even when it's outside their direct responsibility, to be strong leaders on those issues.
Do you think we should have ever closed schools during the pandemic?
We should have closed schools for 2 weeks, and then we should have fought like hell to get them open much sooner than we did. 2 weeks was a reasonable response.
Should we have opened schools before restaurants and bars?
Yes, without question.
Before we go down this pandemic rabbit hole, oh god, I already lost track of what I was about to ask.
You were gonna
I think it was
ask
Commissioner
Hardesty,
Hardesty.
Well, yeah, I was. I had a question for Renee, but I'll think of it in a second. Same question. What would you grade the mayor on handling gun violence?
I think I would give him a D+. And I think I would give him that
That's his
because
best grade so far. He's doing
Didn't see that coming, did you?
Take away, you can go back to City Hall and tell him you gave him the best grade.
knowing I have to go and vote that budget with him, you know? Guys are getting me in trouble. Let me say, you know, I think in some ways the mayor, let me just say that getting rid of the gun violence reduction team was not the wrong thing to do. Neither was getting rid of the school resource officers or the transit police. All the auditor reports showed the disparate outcomes that were race-based, and actually very little prosecuting took place. The FIT team operates exactly like the gun violence reduction team and the gang enforcement team prior to that. They got a group of community members that they've made sign a confidentiality agreement. They go in a room and then they pontificate about all the great things they did this week and all the gang members they identified and blah, blah, blah. There's nothing on paper. There's no way to check the information that these individuals are given. And I know this because I'm a staff person that sits in at those meetings, just so that I know what's going on. I can tell you that I've asked both Chief Lavelle and Deputy Chief Fromm. The community only has 3 questions. How many guns did you get off the street this week? How many cases are headed to the DA for prosecution? And what's the demographic breakdown of those cases? Those are the only 3 questions. When I put together this oversight board, that was what I gave them the job to do for this new FIT team. And then Sam Adams came in and undid the work that me and my office did. So I pulled my people out. We monitored it, but we are not a part of that FIT team.
So wait, are they collecting data on those 3 points you just mentioned?
Deputy Chief Foam says, oh, that should be easy to do. Chief Lavelle, it's just one-way questions. You ask Chief Lavelle questions, and I never get the answers back. So I hope you'll ask those questions, because again, to me, those are the most important questions.
What, should Sam unwind this?
Yeah, well, when Sam Adams was hired, like the week that this was about to go out, he came in and just totally changed it all so that it works just like every other police oversight board. You sign a confidentiality agreement, and then the police just come in and talk at you. And then and because you're people who trust police, you just listen, you believe what they say. But unless there's something in writing, because you know I'm a data person, I follow the data. Unless it's in writing, that's why the auditor's reports are so important, because otherwise what you get is a version that is put together based on what someone is trying to sell you. And so having those independent assessments about how police spend their time, having those independent audits about do these programs really work, or are we just taking people's word that they work? That's the important part.
But there feels like there's a double standard here. You know, we apply this level of scrutiny indefinitely to the police department. But what about things like the Clean Energy Fund? You know, we break down every piece of behavior in the police, and it's a presumption of guilt and a presumption of inefficiency that's problematic. And policing is a complex topic. I don't mean to simplify it by any means, but listening to you articulate the breakdown of every piece of the police department, where was that scrutiny in the Clean Energy Fund? Where is that scrutiny?
I worked with 12 police chiefs and 6 mayors on these issues.
Let me
so
finish, because I've got another point here. We talk about disparate impact of the gang reduction, the gun reduction teams, in terms of policing. What is the disparate impact in terms of homicides that has resulted from defunding police, from eliminating specialists.
So are you not concerned about the racial breakdown of who police are stopping and pulling over?
Certainly I'm concerned about it. I'm also concerned about the homicides on our street and the color of the skin of those who are suffering from those crimes. And so we traded a bad situation and made it worse, right? I fundamentally believe
What
that.
evidence, what data do you have to support
Go look at the breakdown of homicides in 2021 in the city of Portland and the racial makeup of homicide victims. Look at who was perpetuating the crimes, because a homicide, there's always two sides to this, right? The kid who just ruined their life by pulling a trigger and the victim of that crime. On both sides of that has a disparate impact on black and brown Portlanders, as well as our low income.
What would you have done then? So it sounds like you were not in favor of dissolving the GVRT. What would you have done to address the racial disparities?
Certainly training never can stop on that topic, right? And recruiting from within communities is a crucial piece. We continue to draw too many police from the suburbs. We don't get enough from the city itself. We don't get enough from the communities that are impacted. So putting energies there, real energies, is a key piece. And the preventative aspects. We have gutted community policing off and on for the last, for years in the city of Portland. That's trying to be out in front of these things.
The police have guns and they should be held to a higher standard. I agree PSEF needs more oversight, but the police have guns, they can shoot people. There needs to be higher standards. That being said, Pastor Ed Williams and Kim Dixon, who are co-chairs of the new FIT Oversight Board, forget what it's called, but nonetheless, they're people that care about their communities. They're people that care about the gun violence. They're people that care about equitable policing. And that's exactly where we should be, people that care about their communities, making sure the police are doing their jobs equitably. And that's where we should have been 18 months ago, not 2 months ago, but 3 months ago.
Both of you said you don't think police are treated fairly in Portland. Why?
Social media, the press, City Hall, the presumption of guilt.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, let's look at the shooting over by Red Lion. A police officer shoots a man suffering from mental crisis. Gets reported on Twitter that a black person was shot. No, it was a black police officer shooting a white male. And the police officer was protecting 3 fire employees behind him. That's not what gets tweeted. That's not what immediately gets reported. That's not what just gets blown all over the city. And we have a riot on our hands, 45 minutes later. And it's so.
Did anyone report that particular tweet you're talking about, or was that just a rando on Twitter tweeting that?
Are you asking me, did a reporter in that case amplify what was tweeted? Don't know. In that specific situation, I recall the tweet and I recall how it blew up, and that we had a small riot 45 minutes later. Dead wrong, factually dead wrong.
Why don't you think they're treated fairly?
So one of the things that when you sit on the Citizen Review Committee, you hear both the good and the bad. You hear complaints against the police bureau, and you know that sometimes there's individuals out there that overstep their authority. You also sit on these police review boards where you understand that there's people out there that are harming community members, that are killing people, raping people, all kinds of horrible things. Some of these cases that I've reviewed are ones that unfortunately keep me up at night, because there's bad people out there, but there's also police that go out there and solve these murders, prevent these crimes walking around, and address these issues as they're happening. And you gotta acknowledge the good, and you have to acknowledge the bad. Right now, whether it's social media or perceptions or whatever it is, we have, I think, an acknowledgement of a lot of the bad, rightfully so. We need to make sure that there's accountability, that there's oversight, but there's also a lot of the good. And what we're seeing right now is we're throwing out, in many ways, the baby with the bathwater, because we're fearing so much the bad. We're not incentivizing the good, and we can't solve the crisis that we're having in homicides and crime here without ensuring that we make sure that we have good police, that we encourage good police members to do their job adequately.
Is the police bureau wasting any resources right now, and if so, where?
I have no idea.
Do you want to respond to some of this about whether or not cops are treated fairly in Portland and the perception of them being treated unfairly by your opponents?
Well, the DOJ is still here because clearly we still have problems in the police department. I think as a rule, police are just always given the benefit of the doubt. And I don't think that has changed much, even with the tens of thousands of people taken to the street demanding police accountability back in 2020. People still want an accountable police force, but I think even today, the assumption is police got it right. But if you look at the training materials that Portland Police continue to use, and people got a bit upset about like the 20-something slide, but if you look at all the slides in their training material, all the bad people were black and brown, and all the good people were white. And I went to a police training in DC with the Weed and Seed program over 30 years ago, and all the good people were white and all the bad people were black and brown. Remember, do you know what I'm talking about, that slide that everybody was freaked out about, the hippie looking guy? But the whole slide deck, if you went back and looked at the whole thing, it is the narrative that if we're still doing this 30 years later, training police in this subconscious manner to be on the lookout for brown and black people, then clearly we have not changed the culture of policing.
Okay.
Are there good people in policing? Yes. But the culture itself has been a culture that has not had oversight and has actually refused oversight. And most people have not held them accountable. And I've been doing this
Sorry, we gotta move on
again,
to
but
another.
like 12 police chiefs and 6
Right,
mayors.
but we're gonna move on
I
to.
get you. I understand. No worries.
So I'll ask each of you three, which sitting city commissioner do you think has been the most effective and the least effective?
And
We'll
try
start
to
with
keep
most.
it brief.
Yes, like
sort of,
name.
you know.
Yeah.
Oh, you wanna go ahead, Joe?
Oh, I forgot Joe was still there.
Got here for this, would be appreciated. I haven't seen anyone being effective. We wouldn't be in the situation that we're in today if they were being
Alright,
effective.
sorry, we gotta keep it to just names,
Let
so.
Joe have a minute. He hasn't had a minute.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, what was the question? What was
Sorry,
that?
just keep, if you wanna keep explaining your answer of no one.
We wouldn't be in our position today. We have a lack of police. We have a crisis on our streets. We have vandalism, graffitis, theft. Where are they doing their job? We've spent the last 2 years living in garbage, and the jobs aren't getting done. Everybody's talking about it, but there's no action, no real action fixing the situation at hand. And so I don't give any of them a pass.
Okay, thanks. Vadim?
Most, I'd say Mingus Maps, because he's bringing people to the table, he's proposing solutions, and waiting for enough people to support him at this point. Least, I'm running against Commissioner Hardesty because that's what I believe least.
Renee?
I'm going to give Joanne both. She's been the most effective. She's pushed an agenda and a focus on racial justice, and she's been effective in pushing that to the front of the line. She's also least. She's a direct contributor to the defund police culture we have in our city. And I think she poorly defines the issue of the unsheltered, but it's double-edged sword.
Okay.
Yeah, both of them.
Commissioner?
Well, of course, I'm the best one. And I would say Maps is probably the least experienced one.
Okay. And least effective?
And least effective, yes.
Okay. Commissioner, why do you think local Acts Me 189 did not endorse you in this race?
They had a very tough labor fight, and it's been really hard for labor at the city of Portland over the last couple of years. They've had to take some furlough days, and I certainly understand that why they were really just ticked off with the entire council.
So you don't think it had anything to do with you
I don't think it was personal
specifically?
at all. No. I have a really good work relationship with them, and we'll continue to have one. It was really about and honestly, it was about the mayor and Maps going out promising the police the moon, and while we're in the middle of labor negotiations with other labor unions, and so the backlash is, you can't promise one group of public employees the moon and not actually think other public employees won't want the moon as well.
Renee, obviously, people are putting power brokers and whatever conglomerate you want to call them, but they're putting money behind Vadim. Why not you?
Well, you go through the process, the endorsement process. Some of these were pre-oiled well in advance, like where those endorsements are going to go, including like PBA and some of these others. It was made crystal clear to me early in this process that there would be an independent expenditure in this election to take down Joanne. That was clearly communicated to anyone who was paying attention that this would occur. There is a segment of the city that very much wants her gone.
Right, but my question is,
Wait,
why are they
how is
endorsing?
it communicated?
Multiple ways, so this was the worst kept secret that there would be an independent expenditure against Joanne. We actually actively worked to prevent it from happening, to offset it.
How'd you try to prevent it?
Well, because...
But how did you try to prevent it?
To demonstrate that we had a viable small donor raise, that we've raised over $300,000 in a small donor program, that we're a legitimate candidate that comes from the private sector, that, and I don't mean to sound overly disparaging here, but in some ways, Vadim... What's that?
Just a little bit disparaging.
Just a little bit disparaging, I'll make sure. But in many ways, Vadim was a manufactured client, a candidate, right? He well-groomed himself and well-groomed by kind of the lobbyists and government affairs clique downtown to run for this spot. Many months in the making, including the whole process. So I come along, I'm sitting with the Portland Business Alliance, that goes, we've known Vadim a long time, we don't know you. And I'm sitting there going, I literally know dozens of people in your organizations, if not hundreds, inside the Portland Business Alliance. I'm not known to the lobbyists and government affairs folks. So I haven't been spending my life hanging out with lobbyists and government affairs folks prior to running. I have not done that while I'm running, and I won't do it as a city commissioner.
All right, we're gonna.
Can Vadim respond
yeah,
to the
sure,
claim that you're a manufactured client?
I'd love to.
Candidate, sorry.
Manufactured candidate, sorry. Yeah.
The interesting thing about this is how people perceive you, and people on the far right perceive me as being on the far left. People on the far left perceive me as being in the far right, and I think that speaks volumes about being able to be in the middle and bringing people together. No, I have not known anybody from the Portland Business Alliance. I knew their names, but I have never met with them prior to...
they certainly knew who you were. They made that point to me.
And so that's, those conversations are pretty interesting because I never wanted to run for office. I have a wonderful job. I have a wonderful job that pays way more than running for office here. I have a retirement that I'm giving up probably a couple $1 million for to run for office here. I'm running because Portland is suffering. I'm running because people are dying in the streets. I'm running because we need to change things to make Portland the great city we all envision to be, including climate, including environmental things. And that's the passion that I brought. I know, from the reporting, the passion may not show all the time, but that's what people who knew me saw, and they asked me to run. And then I started meeting people. I come from an immigrant family, a refugee family. We came here with very little, with nothing. I have no connections. I moved to the city 8 years ago. I'm not a fifth generation person. I'm not a person with businesses whose family has businesses, who knows everybody in Portland. I started from scratch here with nobody, and then I met people, and I wanted to make a difference here, and I'm trying.
Who asked you to run?
Mostly it was people from the Public Safety Action Coalition. So Stan Pankin was one of the people that really urged me to run, and Chuck Duffy as well. These are individuals that saw something in me and asked me to run for office, and I was like, no, there's going to be a candidate here that can make a difference. And then I saw who was running, and I thought that for sure I'm the best candidate in order to lead us forward, and so finally I agreed. But there was no behind the scenes, there was no meetings. I came out, I started meeting with people for the first time, and so the perceptions are really interesting because they are not the reality, and the perceptions are something that I think is more of people manufacturing to create a story than the actual story.
Has the PPA endorsed in this race, by the way? Has the PPA endorsed in this race?
I haven't heard anything yet.
Oh, okay. Just curious.
I want to go back real quick, just before we have to close this out. But I want to go back real quick, Vadim, to your point. You've made the case here that you are essentially financially independent of being bought and sold by anybody who is going to bankroll your campaign with an independent expenditure that somewhat boggles the mind. So demonstrate that independence. How are you going to shill them?
How am I going to shill them?
Yeah, when the PBA comes to you and asks for something, what is something that you disagree with the PBA on where you're going to tell them no?
That's the thing. If you look at the people I'm working with, it's not just the PBA. I'm not a product of any particular organization.
I'm asking about the PBA.
I have the
How
unions.
are you going to tell the PBA no? Give me a place where you're independent from them.
I'm totally independent from them. I mean, I'm glad that they're backing me, okay? But this is not a relationship I've had. I'm glad they're backing me, and I think they're backing me not because I'm a business owner or I've worked with them. They're backing me because I have the ability to make rational choices and work with people. So you might as well ask me, how do I have all the union endorsements? And what will I say to the unions? I think PBA
I'm
and the
offering
unions
you an
are
opportunity to knock this
All
out of
the
the park.
union
All you gotta do is
endorsements,
tell
I
me
don't
one
think
place.
one place where I would say
One place where you would tell them no. What's something they want that you don't want to give them?
Oh, you mean like what's on their website or something like that where they want? Because they haven't asked me for
You
anything.
know the
Yeah.
agendas of various groups. They don't have to explicitly always tell you.
I don't think
Give
I'm
us an
quid pro quo.
Well,
I'm just-
so
I'm
here's
saying-
what I'm demanding of the people that I work with, whether it's the developers or PBA, find a way for us to get the money and the places to house unhoused people. And, they'll say, well, not in the industrial area, not in downtown,
This isn't a
whatever.
targeted question
Yeah.
at you, just so you know. Like, it is the value of this newspaper to see independent thinking from candidates. So my editor is asking you, how are you independent from that particular group? Where is the difference between your positions and theirs? Can you give an example?
But that assumes,
My guess is that part of the difficulty of this question is Vadim may not understand some of their positions, so maybe it would help if you try.
Yeah, they haven't come
what's
to
the
me and said,
position that
"Here's
you're
what we need
familiar
from
with
you."
the PBA holds?
Are you saying you don't know what the PBA stands for in the city?
I mean, I've read their website. I mean, we have no communications. I've read their website and it says we want to build more around high traffic areas. We want to make sure that that we have light rail and more transportation. We want to make sure that, they have their city, county, and state itineraries, but I think that is not something that, the city generally disagrees with, as far as I know. And so if y'all know something that's troubling,
I can offer you an example, but I don't think it would make sense for me to give you 20 examples and keep playing tennis like that.
Right.
An obvious example would be that they would want a complete sit-lie law. No one can sit on the sidewalk, no one can lie on the sidewalk. They've expressed that desire many times before over the last 15 years I've been here. Would you give them a sit-lie law?
No, but we have to, enforce whatever laws are in the book. We're not going to create new laws.
Okay.
Can we ask each candidate to give them the opportunity to ask someone else a question, please?
We are so over time.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's fine.
Well, let's do it
So,
then.
Vadim, if you have a question of either candidate, please ask me.
Okay, Commissioner Hardesty, so in 2019, I believe it was, you were in Goose Hollow protesting the boulders on the sides of the road, keeping homeless people from camping next to high traffic areas. Last year, I believe there were 19 people that died in the homeless community because they were in high traffic areas. Pedestrians, 70% of all pedestrians that died. Do you disagree with your former protests?
It was actually 2018 that I stood on the side of the road because what I thought was we could have a more, ODOT should have had a more compassionate approach. If you're gonna spend $1 million to put boulders in, we could have spent that money to actually house the people that were removed by that boulder activity. I have invested lots of money in our high crash quarters since I've been on the city council and since I've been transportation commissioner. In fact, we've daylighted over 300 crosswalks so that it's safer. I'm using all the resources we have in the city to make sure that we are prioritizing those investments. So today, if somebody was trying to put boulders down as a tool to remove houseless people, I would be just as viciously opposed to spending $1 million on boulders rather than using it for housing that people could afford to live in.
Renee, you have a question?
Yeah, I think I'll ask Vadim on the independent expenditure. When that article was released, the Oregonian article, your campaign manager, I'm talking about the original one by Shane Kavanaugh, your campaign manager is quoted, and I'm going to paraphrase, you'll have to go find the exact quote, that she was not aware of the pending independent expenditure. Given the number of discrete campaigns she's involved in, including the Ulysses PAC, including in looking at the the parallels and donors between those who are being reported to give to this PAC, that are giving to a number of campaigns she's been involved in, that have given to your campaign. Do you stand by her statement that she was not aware of this independent expenditure?
Jessica.
Gotcha. Yes. Jessica.
I do. She's an honest person, and that's why I trust her. I did not know about that expenditure. The fact that you say that you knew about it ahead of time, I think is really interesting, because
I was told numerous times about the pending, that was in the works.
Well, you know, that's wonderful.
Including from your donors. I mean,
then it's a surprise to one of us at least. But I want to say my campaign manager upholds the highest ethical standards, and I trust her implicitly.
Joanne, good question. You got nothing?
All right, we're 10 minutes past.
Yeah, okay, so we've got one last question that's supposed to be like a fun-ish question. So pandemic's not over, we acknowledge that, but in some ways it does feel like it's abating a little bit. Can you give us a moment of joy you had recently when you felt like we might be seeing the end of the tunnel, Commissioner?
Yes, I got to go see President Biden today, and most people were not masked.
Okay. What did you say to him?
And we actually talked about, I didn't get a chance to talk about transportation, but he actually asked me what I did, and I told him, and he said, you should be at the county. It's a lot easier in the city, so you're telling me.
You know, these guys are like the county also.
I'm sure they're great,
Renee?
but no, I'm effective where I am, so no sense changing.
Renee?
you know, it actually goes back to last spring, walking my 9-year-old to school, who had been locked out for a year with my wife. We both cried walking him to school that day. So it was a joyous day.
So Mississippi Studios was closed for a long time in music because of the space there, and they had a little sign with the number of days that they've been closed. And I went back on the first day that they reopened. They had a big X over the sign for the number of days that they reopened, and they played music. Jim Brumberg was up there on the stage as well. And people were listening together in a room to live music again, and that speaks volumes about how grateful it is.
And Joe?
Well, I don't know if you know, I'm the chairman for the Multnomah County Republican Party. And recently we held a meet and greet and dessert with 33 different candidates for Oregon here as local and state. We were able to bring these people together with a nice group. I don't know what the attendance exactly was, but we filled the building. It was pleasant. Everybody had a great time. Some people wore masks, most people didn't. It was nice to be able to do that again and just conversate and talk.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you to everyone for coming.
everyone.
We really appreciate it. Have fun at the Laurelhurst Forum, that's next, right?
Yeah,